Welcome to the Veil Between Lives, a sanctuary where lived experience meets the great mystery. Here we hold soulful conversations with those who have touched the unseen and what lies beyond the physical world. We're honored you're here, stepping into this space with us. We're your hosts, Em and Susan. And our very, very special guest today is Kim Kane, a certified clinical hypnotherapist, quantum consciousness facilitator of Whisper of Trees Wellness, with a foundation in wholeness-centered hypnotherapy and expanded awareness journeys. She guides individuals into direct experiences of connection and belonging. Her work explores consciousness as a unified field and emphasizes self-trust, integration, and empowerment without hierarchy. Thank you so much for joining us today, Kim. So happy to have you. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here with both of you and opening this space so that we have the opportunity to have conversations that are deep and meaningful and authentic. And thank you so much for creating this space.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. So I would love if you could share with us and our audience today maybe a little bit about your backstory and early life and any pivotal moments that led you on your spiritual path.
Sure. Well, I grew up in my earliest days. I was a very spiritual kid, had the unseen playmates, and they were very real to me. And I now believe that they were real, regardless of what I was told at the time. But I also grew up in a household of extreme religiosity, and that period of just really feeling loved and supported by my invisible and even the deity of my religion. I felt a real closeness there and support. But over time, what happened with that was, I guess, the injection of fear and extreme obedience and, following a very specific path, and really the idea of external perfection. I don't think there seemed to be as much concern about what was happening on the inside as long as you performed correctly on the outside. And I completely stepped away from any type of spirituality. And I think this happens to a lot of us that end up in those extreme religious zones, that we confuse spirituality with religion. I didn't know as a kid that they were not the same thing. I thought they were one and the same. And as I stepped away from that, it's a lonely place, to going from feeling connected to everything to just being away from it all. And along those lines, then, as a teen, not fitting in, we moved a lot. I went to 11 schools by the time I finished high school. We lived in other countries, other states, new kid a lot. And that the biggest thing was not fitting in. I refused to fit into my family because of what I saw. It felt very hypocritical. I think a lot of teens just see hypocrisy everywhere, and I was one of those types, and especially with the religion. And then I would say I spent a good 10 years in the dark decade of the soul, and a lot of struggles, a lot of dark, dark times. And then I discovered recovery communities, and what a great place to land, because I learned a lot about self-honesty, sharing the truth without shame, being able to forgive myself and others, and feeling a lot of support. and fitting in and a sense of belonging for quite a while, a number of years. And then things happened professionally and personally that really drove me to look deeper into things. And I first, well, not first, I did pretty much all kinds of things that came my way, but the first largely changed type of modality I embraced was shamanistic studies. And I studied with a woman who was who had gone through the Four Winds with Alberto Bioldi's group. And oh, I just loved that. And that opened things up. And then later, after some other events, then hypnotherapy and quantum consciousness, past lives. Yeah, so that's a little bit about getting from there to here.
So, as a quantum consciousness practitioner, can you explain to our listeners what exactly quantum consciousness is?
Yeah. So, the idea of quantum consciousness is that we have the opportunity to go into expanded states. So, through some specific techniques, we allow the client to expand. And what we're inviting them to do is to move beyond the body, beyond the mind, and beyond the personality, and being that forever part of themselves. So when we're in session, then we're speaking to that expanded state. We're no longer speaking to the client because the client's kind of allowed to just be in that chair. The body continues to breathe. It does its automatic heartbeat and breath. And the expanded self then can move into that place where we can be free to absorb, to connect with the wisdoms that the specific session would be looking to connect with. And in that state then, boy, it's such a loving space. It's that sense of connection that we may have had as a child or maybe in deep meditation, but it's so full of love and just a sense of everything being possible and nothing being important. And so that's the way into the quantum consciousness through the facilitation. What we say is that quantum is the science of possibility and consciousness is all there is. So it's combining that science of possibility to the all that is, which is our consciousness.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And so before becoming a quantum consciousness practitioner, you did your hypnotherapy studies. And I'm kind of curious, what led you from the hypnotherapy into the quantum consciousness? And I'm also really curious about maybe the different approaches, the differences, or maybe even the similarities between the
Mhm.
approaches. I'm really curious.
Yeah. Well, one thing I have to say is that I was really fortunate to find the community I did when I was studying hypnotherapy. I went to HCH Institute, which is a psychospiritual model. And another thing that I think is so important for me, and I think a lot of others, listen, I have a real bad case of guru-itis. I do not like to be in an environment where someone says, follow me only. You must do it my way. This is it, and I am the be all end all. And there are a lot of places like that out there. Let's face it. We see that all over the place. And Shates Institute was, really the opposite of that. It was like, here's what we have. We're going to teach you so that you can give care to your clients, so that you're well trained and that you know how to take care of the client in that space. And then they're free to have
Mm.
then their own session. But I think as importantly as a student there was that then we were free to make it our own and to turn it into whatever it was that we were growing into be because we're starting out. I was starting out as a newbie. I had had very little exposure to those expanded states before I started in the shaman training. But this was looking at it through yet another lens. And I loved that we weren't put in a box. And I think that made it easy. Then I was actually um, at a International Board of Regression Therapy presentation one time, which now I'm on the board of, and I just love it. They're wonderful people. But Peter Smith did a presentation, and he had written the book. I mean, just look at the title. It was a quantum consciousness journey through other realms, and I loved what he had to say. It just, you know, how sometimes you hear something that's just your thing, and I was like, it piqued my interest. And the same thing with him. It was like, here's the protocol. You have a duty of care with your clients. You must make sure that what you're doing is taking care of them in this space, but also then allowing them to be what they are. So, um, yeah, he again did that same offering of this is how we do things now. Go and make it your own. And I think I toddled off a little longer maybe on just that, but to me, that's so important for anyone wanting to get into this work to really research and look at what you're getting into. And listen, if it's floats your boat to have, you know, some real specific parameters and that you only do it one way, there's certainly nothing wrong with that. And just knowing what it is that you need, you know, to do this kind of work, if that's what you want to do, or seeking out a practitioner. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so that was, you know, kind of how I made my choice to be there. But the differences I think are with hypnotherapy, we talk about going inward and connecting with the subconscious and the higher self. So there's kind of like these three parts. We have this higher self, and I'm showing it, you know, hierarchical, but of course it isn't, but the higher self, the self, and then the subconscious. And then in quantum states, we're expanding out. We're not going within. We're leaving the body behind and the mind and the personality and connecting to this consciousness that's all around us. So, but listen, anything can happen in a session, as you well know. We might go anywhere. We might be with a fairy. We might be with a mushroom in a fungal environment. Who knows? So in a lot of ways, when in shaman work too, that you may end up anywhere. And that's all cool. And as long as a facilitator can hold that space, it's gonna be beautiful no matter where you go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I love those spaces. Maybe you could give us an example or two of a shift in one of your clients' consciousness, like going into a session with one idea, but coming out with a whole different experience and a shift of consciousness.
Wow, you know, I have one that just is fairly recent within, this year or within 2026, and, uh I like to use gender neutral pronouns so that we're not giving anything away about the client, and a little bit more general in the specific nature of what they came for. But this client was having a lot of pain due to a inflammatory event, and it was chronic and very, very painful. Specifically wanted to have a session about feeling supported. They felt very isolated. They had moved away from where they'd been living for quite a bit of time and had made the decision to have nothing to do with Western medicine, which I think a lot of us in alternative spaces can understand. And they were also experiencing, you know, this a lot of pain with when these events would particularly flare up. And so the main point of the intention for that session was a sense of connection and not feeling so separated. And if there could be some pain relief, you know, that would be nice too. And so during the session they felt really connected and that sense of everything as well, that there really was nothing to worry about with this disease and its manifestations. Well, then they contacted me. We got together about a week after. I always like to do a kind of post-integration session, and they told me that they had decided to reintegrate with Western medicine, which kind of surprised me, and they had gone in to see, about some other things and discovered that in addition to this anti-inflammatory, they'd been diagnosed also with cancer. Now you would think, "Oh my gosh, something that here you go and you're feeling this sense of connection." And this client, though, one of the things also was kind of struggling to receive. When she reintegrated into Western medicine, which she didn't want to do and now felt completely fine about, they arranged transport. They let them know that they were eligible for some government assistance, some financial assistance that they'd been unaware of. They helped them file taxes because of this disability. They hadn't filed taxes in several years. I mean, things were just running out of the woodwork to support them. And they still, we had another session a couple of weeks ago, and they still are in that very connected place. Like, this is all fine. And that sense, and I think this is, sometimes so difficult, but such a necessary conversation about healing and what it can take so many forms. It's not always listen out there, self and the consciousness, it needs to look exactly like this. This is what I want. This is how it needs to show up. And that's such magical and almost limited thinking. And there's this idea that we could be so much more of opening up. So in this very moment, practical solutions, my goodness, sometimes we need practical solutions, not some airy fairy thing, right? And so they got transport, they got money in, and being taken care of and no longer feeling out. And so internally supported and externally supported. But all of that was not what the client specifically came for. And how could anyone know all that those things would transpire, right? Yeah, I, I love that the universe is there to support us if we'll let it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the openness of that person to just be open to options. And then all these things presented themselves. Imagine a closed minded person, those things, right? Those synchronicities and all those things that fell into place. Did that on purpose? Probably because the person was really open and just like, I'm going to let go and just allow whatever needs to happen, right? And trust that it's
Yes.
in my best and highest good. Yeah.
And I I could really relate to not wanting to be integrated in the Western medicine world. And yet once they let go of that idea of I won't do certain things, then the universe just rushed in to fill it. It Yeah, that boat that's coming along, we don't always know what it's going to look like. If we're waiting for a yacht and a rowboat comes by, we'll still get over to the island.
Great metaphor. What about for you since you started practicing quantum consciousness? Have you noticed any particular shifts or openings or unexpected things show up for you through your practice? And maybe even just, we learn a lot also from our clients. We actually get a lot out of this work. So I'm curious how that looks for you personally.
You know what? I feel so blessed to be doing this because I learn an incredible amount from my clients. And in quantum consciousness journeys, and it of course varies from person to person. Some clients need more kind of guidance and support in terms of where are you and kind of helping them navigate the realm or area they find themselves in. Other clients, once they're expanded, sometimes I don't say another word for 45 minutes or an hour. They're just doing what they're doing and reporting back what's happening. And this was a really neat thing for me that I learned from a client. So this was someone I've seen, I don't know, 4 or 5 times, and they love being in that expanded state. And so they were out and having this experience. And normally what we do is duty of care. You want someone to be fully back in their body and, because an expanded state, It's not really one you often wanna go walking around in. You're gonna be, maybe not able to drive a car and just do some, normal things around the house. So, anyway, that's what I've always done, bring them back fully into their body and making sure they're, there and so this client on their own was at a certain place and just opened up their eyes and said, "I wanna be there and here." And I paused because I didn't know how to be there and here. And so I spoke to them briefly and they said, "I don't really want to talk. I want to just, and I asked if we could leave the video on for just a bit because I wanted to just see what happened and make sure everything was fine. And then, they just went off. But I thought how interesting. A couple of days later, had a quantum consciousness session myself, and I told the facilitator, "This is what I plan to do. We'll leave it open, obviously. We wanna trust the." Let me tell you what happened. This was so neat, and again, you need to do this with someone who's a more frequent flyer, so to speak, and as we were nearing the end of the journey, I just opened my eyes and said, "I'm here and I'm there," and I closed out the session, and I was visiting with a tree, actually, a mother tree in the journey, and I went and just spent time in the here and that state, being with that tree for probably about 3 hours until it got dark. And it
Wow.
was so expansive, and so now I will do that a couple of more times with another practitioner to practice and make sure we are offering the appropriate duty of care to someone in that state, and obviously when they've done it before. But what an amazing thing that I was taught by a client spontaneous. "What?
Well,
You can do that?"
I love it. Wow.
And now that just it often feels like, uh, I don't know about you guys, but when we're doing these things and then you come upon something, it's like, well, duh. Why couldn't you do that? But it had never occurred to me and I hadn't seen it done. Maybe all kinds of people are doing that. I just didn't know about it or think about it. And what a opportunity to be able to be in that expanded state here and just felt like waves of, wow, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And because you were open to what the client was asking too, like you weren't set in a rigid structure of like it has to be this way, um, that's a beautiful thing, and then look at the gift that you got back, that you received back from that, from her asking for that, or her or him asking for that in that way. So that's really beautiful that you were, again, not rigid, in your structure. I
yeah,
miss
yeah.
that.
It seems to me that it would be difficult to be rigid and do this work, and yet I have gone to practitioners that have a very specified and do not, deviate, and while that isn't something necessarily that I'm called to, I have friends that have gone to see practitioners that practice in that way, and they felt very supported and very safe and had a wonderful experience, so I'm not here to say what, any of that is, but that each of us should seek out what feels best to us and go with that because that kind of support and be able to say, we're going to go here and then you're going to do this and this is exactly how it's going to go. I'm sure that's very reassuring for a lot of people and they can feel safer than somebody like me who's like, I don't know where we're going to go. Let's see what happens. That's not really reassuring to some people. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I think we've been entrained a certain way that life is full of structure and rules and parameters that we have to live within. And that's the interesting and wonderful thing about hypnotherapy is there really are no rules except for to hold the container for your client, right? And
Yeah.
and ask open-ended questions and not project your ideas. But other than that, it's such a creative landscape and it's so opposite of everything we've been taught in our regular world. It's like throw all that out the window and just let
Yeah.
go and have fun, really,
And
right?
have
Get
fun.
creative. Yeah, yeah.
Well, and I think one of the things too I've really been kind of looking at more recently is the ability to tolerate uncertainty. And psychology, when they're talking about that, they're, I think, on the road to actually declaring it as a separate diagnosis because it underlies so much of generalized anxiety disorders and over worrying in our culture. Uncertainty is, you know, is to be avoided at all costs. And I can understand that, right? Like, even myself, I'll be sitting there and going, I wonder what, I don't know, blah, blah, blah. Well, I don't even wait a second to try to wonder about it if it's some kind of fact-based thing. I just, Google what is that? And oh, now I know, blah, 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 blah. And gosh, over time, it feels like we in our drive to stay away from that uncertainty, I have to distract myself. I have to, or we worry. Worrying is a great distractor for uncertainty, you know? The worst case scenario, catastrophize everything. But what does that do to us? What happens to our bodies when we're thinking the worst case scenarios at all times to keep ourselves from, my gosh, I don't know. I
Yeah.
don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know. And the more I practice that, the less scarier it gets. So I'll watch a bit of news and go, and my mind will start to imagine that certain things are going to transpire. And I go, oh, wait, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. And what if it's wonderful? I don't know. And based on the history of my life, whatever happens, I cope. I I'm resilient. I come out all the better for whatever's happened. I mean, there isn't anything that's happened, even the quote tragedies that I'm not the better for. So I don't know. I don't know.
I love that.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
talked about that earlier is that letting go and trusting and just so many times things turn out better than we had expected.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah. Speaking of that, Kim, I'm really curious, like, how do you bring play and fun and curiosity into your sessions and into the work that you do? Like, because I feel like, the word hypnotherapy, some of these terms can feel kind of heavy. And I think there is a way to hold it or handle it with a lightness and fun and creativity. So I'm curious, in what ways do you bring that into your sessions?
Well, I really just follow the client. And what happens so often when um, in expanded states, altered states, once someone is free of, even if it's just for that moment, of all of this conditioning, they often giggle. And, there's nothing I have to bring in there. I'm following, and I will laugh with them. I support that of just because, you know, I think the first couple of years, of course we take our work seriously, but we don't have to take ourselves seriously. And I was afraid to even smile. It's just like, let's have a session and, and that's fine, but, and I was afraid if, you even smile that someone's gonna, this is serious stuff. And it is, but it also isn't because none of it's really true. These things we think we aren't true. We don't need to fix anything. We're just fine the way we are. It's only our belief that there's something wrong with us. And it really is absurd once you get inside of that and understand that none of this matters. We're, oh my, making mountains out of molehills. And and of course, we have trauma and things that, are gently supported and held. When we let go of that for those moments in time, it's like they no longer are a concern. And man, that's so much lighter. And I think when we're lighter, we naturally just we're buoyant, and it's like a little kid with a real well, it comes out as giggles or just, real out laughing out loud for real. I think that's amazing. Yeah. Yeah.
Feel like our higher self, our spirit also is very fun and kind of creative and childlike. And, when we get into those other states of consciousness and let that part step forward, it really is fun and funny, right? It even makes a silliness of how seriously we take things sometimes in our regular everyday life. We make it so important when it's, like you said, really matter anyway.
Yeah, and well, in session, I think, quite often what comes up for clients too is one of the things I'll ask is what does the client need? Because again, I'm not talking to the client, I'm talking to their expanded state, but when upon return, what will the client need to stay connected? And almost always one of the things that's included is you need to have more fun, be creative, play. It's, dancing, riding, swirling, turning a somersault, just really basic things. Take your shoes off in the yard, just they have some really specific things where we can just and it feels so childlike and just a reminder that we start off perfect. Everything we needed to know, we knew until the conditioning set in and, was put upon us. And we are light and fun and things happen and then we just move on. That's our natural state. All this other stuff, it really has been put upon us. And so it's so much, isn't it a matter of not really learning new things? It's unlearning the other things that have been put our way. Yeah.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Yeah, the unlearning.
Mhm.
So the great unlearning.
That sounds like a novel you could be writing.
Yeah.
It may be someday.
Yeah. I like that.
And I feel like behind the great unlearning is where wisdom comes,
Mm.
where wisdom is gently delivered to us.
Well, like you said, the more you know, the more you don't know, or the more we know, the less we know. And I always think of that old Mark Twain quote. I don't know if I'm going to say it exactly, but it was amazing how much my father learned from the time that I was 17 until I turned 21. And it's just that, that certainty again, and the ability to tolerate uncertainty, as teens, that's one of the phases. That's the normal phase to go through. Here's how it works. This is how it is. And you, mother, are full of it because you have no idea. And we're so certain and we know the answer. And that's part of the process. But when we get to that part, hopefully one matures, not always, but we get to that part where we don't know, have no idea, don't know what's happening, don't know how that works. I love hanging out with people who wanna explore those spaces, like the both of you have just like, "We don't know, but let's go see, let's be curious, let's" how fun talking about fun, Susan, is that? Oh my gosh.
I actually believe we are here to have fun and joy. I think that's purposes for incarnating, and it doesn't seem like when you look around that's happening as much as it should be. So I'm a big proponent of bringing joy and fun and wherever and whenever you can.
Well, how
Yeah,
is that for you?
I love it. Yeah.
How do you bring that in, the joy and fun?
Wow, just in every little thing. I mean, laughing at something that you might not normally think is funny, like, you stub your toe, right? But, like, this to me is all a divine comedy. When you step back and you look at everything that happens and you go, "Oh my god, this happens for a reason." Like, the universe has such divine intelligence working behind the scenes to orchestrate things, and I think, again, obviously laughter is really good for our mental and emotional health, right? But when we can just laugh at ourselves or just think, "Oh my god." and just some simple, silly little thing. I think it's super important to bring into our daily life.
Mm.
Wow.
So I dearly love to laugh. I love to laugh. It is so therapeutic. And Susan and I have quite a good laugh from time to time, wiping tears. We crack up. But I do have a broken foot right now and failed to laugh when I stubbed my toe. I
Ah.
have to say I took that pretty
Yeah,
seriously. I'm
yeah.
laughing now.
Well, what is it they say that comedy is tragedy plus time? And I think that's so true, right? I mean, in the moment, sure. And listen, I don't want to, make light of anyone's difficulties and challenges. And yet, often, if we do this work and walk this path, can make light of it ourselves once it's in the rearview mirror. Sometimes we're fortunate enough to even laugh about it in the moment, right? And I feel like that idea of us, holding it lightly and really, well, and I don't know if we want to go deep here or not, but the idea that life itself is to be held lightly because I'm going to come around again in some form or not even again, it's already happening. In quantum consciousness, we look so often at parallel lives and other versions of ourselves. But beyond the timeless state, none of that's linear, right? It's all happening. We can't conceive of it and all of that. But I think of it as that movie title, Everything Everywhere All at Once, because that's what's seemingly anyway going on. And so even getting all worked up about, this life and what I have to accomplish and I need to get it done. And it's like, you know what? I've met the version of me that already did this. And she's, really quite bohemian and she's running around and she's living in a colony of artists and having a great time. She has no money and they're creating art and doing all of these things. And she sends me little vibrations from time to time. And I like to meet up with her because she's like, let's just have fun and create and play with this life. And that's what she's doing. She didn't get caught up in needing money or buying a house or any of that stuff, and she doesn't have any of it, and as far as I can tell, she's having a great time.
Hmm.
So, again, what do I know?
I love this, the whole idea of the quantum consciousness and, in past life regression, now sometimes we refer to it as other lives, not just past lives, because I do believe it is all happening at once. So I'd love if you could touch a little deeper into the quantum consciousness, the idea that this is happening all at once and, our construct of linear time. And
Yeah.
maybe how we can utilize these other aspects of the self that are already happening, like, at the same time. How can we bring that in, those aspects in to support us in our everyday life, right? Because there's each one of those parts of us has gifts, right?
Yeah. Well, and there's so many different ways I think to look at all of this, but within um, the quantum consciousness lineage that I come from with Peter Smith, he looked at it from the lens of Hugh Everett's idea of multiple lives, of many lives, and that as we move down decision points, then we branch off. And here's someone doing it this way, and someone who's doing it that way. And the idea is then we can, in our expanded state, actually meet up with these other versions and particularly if we're struggling with something, there's a version of us that isn't struggling. Either they've never encountered it or they've overcame it. And it's so interesting meeting with a very version of us who's either farther down the road or something and to not be embroiled in whatever it is that our human self is embroiled in at the moment and to get that confirmation that it is okay and that you can let go of because really it's the concern about what's happening, which is causing the suffering, right? Not so much the happening itself and our need to know how it's going to turn out. And well, if we can let go, live in that uncertainty and not be living in the concern, then it's just doing what it's doing. And meeting some other version of the self is just allows that to be free. And one of the things that we always do while we're in that expanded state is to say, are there other versions that are still suffering in this way? And can we help them? And sometimes we get little groups of us going. So I have this version that I've met this artist who I just adore, and a version that's still kind of really struggling because of some other choices that they made to stay in a dark state a lot longer. And so we can all help and support each other. And I really feel that we have that opportunity. And gosh, of course I want to help another version of myself. And then just even if that's all too out there for anyone listening to this, another really practical thing we can do is just to imagine ourselves 10 years down the road or 15, depending on how old we are, to 30 years down the road, and saying, what are you doing for that person? Because certainly if you stay alive, you will be that person. And what will they say to you in 20 or 30 years when they turn around? Will they thank you or will they say the other you, just like, hey, I do not like the decisions you're making and look what you've done. And for some reason, I don't know what it is. I find it easier to find current day kindness when I think about this other version of me 10 or 15 years from now. And I really, when I'm struggling with a decision, I'll say, oh, what would be helpful to her? Mhm. And then it's like, oh, because I want to help her. I don't want her life to be harder. I don't, it just, when I think of earlier versions of myself that made some pretty wackadoodle decisions, and I say, thanks a lot. And so I want to take care, and that means moving and exercising and eating and just all the things, right? And it makes it where I wanna do it because I'm not j some days you'll be like, I don't wanna walk. I don't wanna lift, weights, whatever it is." And then I think of her and I'm like, "Oh," and I just see her kinda patting her foot and going, you better. I will, okay." So there's that metaphysical look at it, but just the very practical human look too, right? I love living in the metaphysical world and moving into expanded states, but how are we bringing that practically into our lives to support our daily business? Yeah.
Excellent point. Yes. Beautifully said. I'm also kind of curious, like, what's your ideal or maybe even your typical type of client? Like, what kinds of people seek you out for this work?
I since I also do hypnotherapy, I can sometimes someone may want to have a quantum consciousness session, and after a discussion, it feels like it might be better to work with them through a hypnotherapy lens so that we can address some of the kind of issues that are looming. And I only say that because there are certain techniques that just seem to lend themselves better to hypnotherapy. Um, the quantum consciousness person is, generally speaking, very generally, someone who's already had experience in deep meditation, plant medicine, near death experiences, out of body experiences, lucid dreaming, someone who may be a little more used to altered states and very accepting of them. It can happen that someone, comes in and through a conversation and discovery, it seems fine to move into that. But that's, for me anyway, a little unusual that they move into quantum consciousness realms only after having had some of these other experiences. Yeah.
I see that makes sense. Have you seen, as a practitioner of also hypnotherapy, have you seen since you started this work more of an awakening or more of a mass shift in consciousness? Or how have you seen kind of consciousness even change so far doing this work?
Well, I think people are wanting more of the experience instead of a belief system. And maybe I just see that because I do have that guru-itis and I don't want people to be dependent on me. And I don't want to chain some sort of financial gain to someone staying unwell. I mean, that's the whole idea of pharmaceuticals and Western medicine. We don't cure people, we treat them. We allow them to stay on medication with their blood pressure. They're not cured. And everything that we do in in those particular realms, there's very few things that are cured. A broken leg, cured, done. But ongoing conditions are only treated. And I don't really want to treat clients. I like them to be able to um, step into that space. And for myself as a practitioner, I think, um, it's important to continue to have those experiences. But what I see coming in is people really wanting the experience more than I don't know, an indoctrination, a belief system, or certainly the more I don't wanna use the word elevated, maybe you could help me find a better word, but someone who's had more experience in the space, is more comfortable with just experiencing and not needing a belief system to go along with it because they'll create their own.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that. That's so well said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love this idea of self-empowerment, right? Like you said, you want this person to embody this experience and, this healing experience. And in that, they may come back to you later and they may not. But the goal is to really, create a wholeness and self-reliance. And I think that's lovely.
Yeah. And being in that now myself, I have at least 3 or 4 maybe, sessions a year myself as client because I so enjoy being in that state. And listen, I would like to be the, spiritual saint who just and flew through life and never need, but life intervenes, stuff happens, and we forget. And so it's nice to, oh yeah, let's just and that's why we have these meetups and these gatherings and this beautiful podcast because we forget. And as we get to listen in to you and Susan, it's like, "Oh, right." And it just kinda gives us that to go. So, sometimes it's just a retouch, not necessarily out of a pain point, but wanting to stay in that kind of that space. And boy, what a gift to be able to offer. And this is one of those gifts that people listening in get to remember that they really do have their own answers. And then whatever bits they pick up, we have a saying in recovery community, take what you need and leave the rest. That you just my answer isn't your answer isn't my answer, but sometimes they're the same, and isn't that fantastic? And what will I learn when your answer isn't my answer? I'll get all kinds of interesting things, and aren't I fortunate to get to hang out in spaces like this?
Yeah.
For somebody who's beginning to walk onto a spiritual path and starting to kind of realize that not everything is just about this material world or starting to have mystical experiences, is there any wisdom that you can share that would support them on their journey?
Well, I think curiosity's the biggest thing. So, what if I tell a story about something that happened to me in that when I didn't get curious? Well, it's so interesting that, and Em, you were talking about this earlier, that we can have multiple experiences throughout life. Um, I think it's also easy to discount them, again, because of conditioning, you know? "Oh, that didn't really happen," or "It didn't mean this." And many years ago, I would say in the early '90s, I was part of this kind of spiritual study group, and at that time, I was very much a follower of things, and so this gentleman, was telling us how it is and how et cetera. And I was really feeling like my spirit growing and just being more aware of the larger world. And, I was single at the time and, very interested in not being single. And everywhere I'd go, I'd think, "Oh, maybe I'll meet someone here." Well, I'd been to a conference in Sedona, and I was feeling really, good about that. And as I was driving down the road, I just had this, I mean, almost a voice, like, it just felt like, "You need to go to this sushi restaurant." And of course, my first thought was, I'm gonna meet a guy here. That's what the spirit is sending me in here, and I'm gonna meet this man, and it's just gonna be so wonderful. And I was all excited, and I go in and I sit down at the sushi bar and I'm looking around, and this woman walks up and she was wearing these robes, and she sat down next to me and she put her hand on mine and she said, "I'm the one you've been waiting for. I'm the one you've been waiting for." I was getting a little emotional when I think about it, and I thought, well, first I thought, "Darn," and then I was like, "What what's happening?" She started telling me this story about being a walk-in. I didn't even know what a walk-in was, and it was that, if you don't know, at least how she explained it to me, was that she had been this person known by a certain name in this lifetime and body, and then this other kind of soul just came in, and now she was this other person. And she told me a lot of things that were just mind blowing. And I was in no way, I did not feel prepared for that. And on the way home, back in the day, we had these CD players in the car. I put on, I don't know if you can remember this, it's almost embarrassing, Yanni. And I put on my Yanni CD and let
We remember Yanni.
Yep. Yep. Totally.
I floated. I felt like the tires were not on the ground. I'm just like, just in this I put this one song on, and it kept playing, and I felt like I got home in 10 minutes from Sedona to Phoenix, where I was living at the time. And the next day I couldn't wait. I went in to tell my teacher, just this thing had happened, and he said, "Well," basically it was like, "How could that happen to you? You're not, you're new and you're not very spiritual yet." And I was like, "Well, I don't, I, that this is what happened." And he was just very skeptical. And I started, as we do then, "Oh, and well, maybe that, I don't know." And, I said, "Well, I'm gonna go meet her at the airport." And he said, "Where?" And I'm like, "I don't know, but we're just gonna meet up with her." And she hadn't told me where or when. Anyway, we went to the airport, met up with him. He had a talk with her. And afterwards, he just really was not very supportive that this was, the way I should be going, because I should be following him. And I said, "Okay. Yeah, you're right. Who am I to?" And I hear what, I mean, that was rather profound. When I look back, I think, how could I possibly have not? I mean, that was big, right? But over time, I minimized it, and that didn't really, and then off it went. But the beautiful thing is about spirit, and is that it doesn't stop. It's not like, "Okay, you blew it, kid. That's it." It kept showing up again and again in different ways. And so, for wisdom for anyone, just be curious and listen. If you're not ready yet, that's all right. It'll come again. Don't be afraid that this, "Oh, you have to jump in right now." It's so gentle with us, and so it's always there, always there. It's just that our antenna has to turn on, to tune into it, but it's always there. So don't be afraid if you're not ready. I promise it won't really hurt if you if you try it, but if you aren't ready, that's okay. There's no mistakes. There's no, don't have to worry about any of this. So and I hope that's something I'll remind myself of, that as I learn new things. You know, I keep hearing things that I think, that can't be true." And I find out, maybe it is. That curiosity will take us so many places, and I think that's why it's innate in human nature to be curious, because it can take us so many wonderful places.
Excellent advice.
Nicely said.
Well, and I think the both of you are very curious. I mean, how have you ended up where you are without that wonderful curiosity, right? Or creating this podcast, how could you have done that without that amazing curiosity?
Yeah.
True.
Certainly has been a learning experience.
Yeah.
Well, this time has been so well spent, and it's been such a pleasure. It really has. Thank you for stepping into this space with us. It has been a true joy. And until we gather again, stay curious, stay grounded, and honor what you know beyond words.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank
And really
you.
quick before we go, how can people find you, Kim? We'll put it in the show notes as well, but yeah, how can people find you to work with you?
Whisperoftrees.com is the easiest way.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.